So it goes back to when I was at ski club with my friends in 8th grade, and we got to the mountain. I got to the top and confidently charged towards the biggest jump in the terrain park with all my speed. And going up to the jump, I caught the edge of my snowboard, and that's the last thing that I remember. My name's Nick Prefontaine.
Nick Prefontaine is a 3 times best-selling author and top motivational speaker.
His STEP system guides clients through trauma to unlock their limitless potential.
How did you stay motivated during challenging times?
At the beginning of your setback, I know it can be overwhelming. However, I just think it's so important to mention that you have to be doing something. By doing something every day, you're building that unstoppable momentum that will carry you through the tough times. I don't think God would have put me through this if I couldn't help people from it.
Today, I'm joined by Nick Prefontaine, a successful real estate investor, speaker, and founder of Common Goal. Nick's journey is nothing short of inspiring, having overcome a traumatic snowboarding accident that left him in a coma, and later using his recovery to fuel his success in real estate and personal development. In this episode, we'll explore how Nick's mindset shaped his recovery, his passion for helping others achieve their goals, and how he's used adversity to drive his success. So I guess the first question that I have for you is, your story begins with a life-changing snowboarding accident. Can you share what your recovery journey was like and how that experience influenced your mindset?
Sure. So, Stacy, that was certainly the start of the beginning of it all, the start of the rest of my life, if you will. So it goes back to when I was at ski club with my friends in 8th grade, and we got to the mountain and we headed right for the chairlift. And on the chairlift ride up, we noticed that it was very icy because it had been raining earlier in the day. However, that didn't stop us. I got to the top, buckled into my snowboard, took a breath of that crisp winter air, and confidently charged towards the biggest jump in the terrain park with all my speed. And going up to the jump, I caught the edge of my snowboard, and that's the last thing that I remember. So due to the severity of my injuries, they wanted to bring a helicopter to the mountain to rush me to the hospital. They couldn't because it was too windy, so they had to send in an ambulance. And out of the 6 paramedics, there was only one who could intubate on the spot, and I needed that to be able to breathe. And he was one of the paramedics that showed up to the mountain that day. And really, there are several things that I still to this day can't explain about my accident. However, I know that one of them is the reason why I'm here today to be able to share this story. And that's no matter what you're going through, no matter what your challenge, you can get through it all just by taking that first step. Because once you take your first step, your next step's always going to be available to you. So something else I learned was that my goggles were the only protection that my head had. They told me that with each subsequent hit after the initial impact, for those of you that are not watching me, I'm rotating my hand. So after, like a wheel. So after I hit, I kept rolling and kept hitting my head. And I learned that not only did my goggles brace the initial impact, as I continued to roll down the mountain and continued to hit my head, my goggles moved to cushion each blow between my head and the ice. So that was the second thing. And then once I got to the hospital in the ICU, I was out for the count. So I had to be partially induced into a coma because they were worried. I already had swelling in my brain, and they were worried that if it increased anymore, I would have died. So they had to induce me into a coma. And while I was resting in the ICU, unable to communicate with anyone, the doctors would come into my room and share with my parents the not so positive news, not so positive news, not so positive news, as I'm sure you can imagine. And my parents stopped them. Actually, I should say my mom, because my dad corrected me a few months ago and he said, no, it wasn't. I don't want to take credit for that. It was your mom. So my mom stopped the doctors and said, not in front of him, because she understood that even though I was in a coma, I was still taking in information. So she made the doctors step outside the room, and once they were outside the room, they shared with my parents that I was in a snowboarding accident, went off a jump, landed on my head, and I was in a coma because they had to wait for the swelling to come down. They weren't sure how long I was going to be in the coma, and even if I did come out of it, there was a good chance that I was going to need 24-hour care for the rest of my life. And my parents didn't accept this like so many other patients do as a death sentence. So they took the information, thanked the doctors, and then allowed me to treat it like any other situation. This was no different than any other challenge that I had faced up to this point in my life. And candidly, I didn't see the difference. As soon as I was aware of my surroundings, because none of that noise got through to me, as soon as I was aware of my surroundings and able to get my wits about me, it was a month after my accident. So I was in a coma for 3 weeks. I really don't remember a month. However, a month after, when I kind of was able to put some things together and get my wits about me, I could it was interesting. I was able to just do the best I could, and I kept getting better every day. And unknowingly, Stacy, I started to use a system to not only make a full recovery but run out of the hospital, and that's the STEP system. So STEP is an acronym. It stands for support. Support, you got to make sure you have the support of your family and friends right from the beginning. And this is going to have you falling back on relationships that you built prior to your setback. T is trust. Trust that once you take your first step, your next step is always going to be available for you. And this also starts with trusting that voice that you have inside of yourself. And we all have that voice inside of ourselves, but too often we push it down or we ignore it. That, oh no, that's over the top. I don't want to ask for the world. And that's unrealistic is another thing. So how I can talk about the voice is before I could talk. So it was pretty recently after coming out of the coma, I overheard my parents talking with my doctors and therapists because they would meet with them weekly on, they said, okay, what do we need to do to make sure Nick makes a full recovery? I heard in the back of my head, even though I couldn't talk yet, I still wasn't audible. It was a whisper at best. I heard in the back of my head, no, you're going to run out. So then running out of the hospital became our common goal. And I was able to communicate that and share it with the rest of my team through whatever, eye movements, blinking. I was able to communicate that to the rest of my team. And then that way, we're all working towards that goal of running out of the hospital. Now, E is energy. And we took a quick detour there, but I want to jump back to the acronym. E is energy. Maintaining your energy allows your body's natural ability to be able to heal itself. Medication has the potential to get in the way of that. So obviously within reason here, I mean, that first night after my accident cost $250,000.
Right.
If it wasn't for modern medicine, I wouldn't be here today. It wasn't like I could just say, no, I'm just going to take some herbs to get over this traumatic brain injury, this head injury. So I needed it to modern medicine to save my life. However, there is a use, time, and place for everything. So a month after my accident, when I came out of the ICU, was a time that we needed to allow the body to heal itself and get off the medication unless it was absolutely critical to my survival. And then P is persistence. So persistence, once you take your first step, keep getting up every day and taking your next step, no matter how small. And by continuing to move forward every day, you are building an unstoppable momentum. And I just like to say this just because I know I'm cognizant of, I recognize the audience here. So it is like could be a lot of like trauma survivors or people looking for that next step or even that first step. But I think it's so important to mention. I don't mention this all the time. However, I think it's appropriate that at the beginning of your setback, I know it can be overwhelming and it can be like, oh, there's just so much to do. And to be where I was, I can't get there. However, I just think it's so important to mention that you have to be doing something. Now, I'm not saying 8, 9, 10-hour days every day at the start of your setback or your trauma, but you should be doing something every day. And by doing something every day, you're building that unstoppable momentum that will carry you through the tough times, because things will get hard. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. So that will help you, and it definitely helped me carry me through the tough times by doing a little bit of something every day, just even for minutes on the days off. So I think that's important to mention. If you fast forward a little bit, less than 60 days later, I did realize my goal of running out of the hospital. And Stacy, it wasn't like my work was done. I had to continue to go to outpatient therapy
Right.
for another 6 months of not double sessions like I did when I was in the hospital, but I still had physical, occupational, and speech therapy 5 days a week, along with being tutored all summer long 5 days a week in order to continue on to high school with the rest of my classmates.
Your story is amazing. And I guess one question I have for you is, how much resilience did you already have built into your reservoir of capacity before the accident? So how much support, safety, and security did you have within yourself prior to the accident?
It's hard to say. However, I will say that looking back on it, because where the step system came from was my family. That's literally how I was raised. Like, to tackle anything, and I'll tell you a little bit later how it came out of me. But that's how I was raised, and that's how I've always been able to just tackle anything that's in front of me.
And
is that system.
The reason why I ask is because you had a belief system ingrained in you that healing was available to you, and that something good after this tragic accident was available to you, and that good things were available to you, and capabilities and agency was available to you. I can just gather that from the story that you were telling. Not everybody goes into a traumatic event like this or a tragic accident having that fullness of a self-belief. A lot of people go in with a limiting self-belief or a lack of support within that family unit. What would you say to people who maybe don't have that first piece of the step system, that support piece, both outside of themselves and within themselves, as far as like a strong core belief system that they are enough for whatever it is that they're seeking to achieve?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mention that, because that's one of the things specifically that I talk about within STEP, the ebook that I'll give your listeners at the end, a way that they can download the whole STEP system for free, which goes into detail about support, trust, energy, and persistence. It's about support, and everyone hears it and thinks, oh, well, lucky for you, you have a nice family, you had a nice childhood, and you were able to have that support. Good for you. I don't have that support. So I don't have family that are there to help me. Well, support doesn't have to be family.
Right.
It happened to be for me because I was only 14 years old when I got into my accident. And it really doesn't matter how old you are, that support can come from anywhere. It can be that neighbor or that friend that's always coming around and asking you if you need anything, if they can help you. But you're so closed off to it because it has to be family. It doesn't have to be family for everyone.
Well, and I would also say, I've been part of different nonprofit organizations over the years. And one of the ones that I was a part of for many years had a mission statement, and part of it was receive with grace. People love to give support, but a lot of people have a lot of shame around receiving support. They're very uncomfortable with receiving support. So did you feel discomfort at all in this process in receiving support, or was receiving support natural for you?
That's a great question. I can say, reflecting back on it, I can say in the beginning, I was, I don't want to say hesitant, but I was kind of like receiving the support. It's important because you have to be open to receiving the support. That's why I talked about you have to be open to receiving the support from everywhere.
Yeah.
So, it's important. It's tough to say. I wouldn't be able to answer that and give you a solid yes or no. However, that's a great point. That's a very valid point by you. And that's why it's important to receive help and support from anyone.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I always talk about within STEP.
Yeah. I think it is so hard. People judge themselves when they're on the receiving end of support. And I remember reading something that Brene Brown wrote one time, and she said, until you can give without judgment, you can never receive without judgment. And you really have to stop and ask yourself, when you're on the giving end to anyone, if there's any little story in the back of your mind that's like, oh, I feel so bad for them. Oh, the situation is X. Like, if there's pity in the giving, you're giving with judgment.
Yeah, there shouldn't be.
Right. But we kind of naturally do it. Like, oh, I feel like I want to give because I'm in a better position, not in a financial better position, or like maybe because I can walk and that person can't walk right now because they're stuck in a coma in a bed, like the thought process, we're so ingrained, it's so innate in us to have a thought of judgment, not from a malicious standpoint. It's all benevolent in some way, shape, or form, but there's still a layer of judgment often when we give. And so the idea of until you can give without judgment, you can't receive without judgment, which is I'm deserving of receiving this and I'm grateful for receiving this without self-judging yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're definitely spot on.
Yeah.
You're on to something because I can't say whether I did or didn't in the beginning, just because I don't know. So I was 14.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I got to the point where I was able to receive it.
Yeah.
And at that point it was almost like every day getting up and just, okay, what's next? What's my next step? What's my next step? What's my next step? That was the only thing I was concerned about.
So it kind of brings me to my next question. Obviously, your mindset was very, very positive. So we know that a positive mindset played a heavy role in this. But my question is how did you stay motivated during challenging times? We're hearing the story from you of, you see the jump, you take the jump, you wake up basically 3-4 weeks later out of this coma, and then 60 days after the 30 days, you're running out. Sounds like an awesome story, but obviously the trajectory from there to getting out did not go like this. It likely was up and down, right? So How did you stay motivated during your most challenging times of recovery?
So Stacey, I always like to, if I could, share this story of doubt, because we all have doubt. So I can remember I would just to give you an inside track into my room, into my hospital room at the inpatient rehab. So I would get up and I would need help from someone, from an occupational therapist, to teach me how to shower again.
Right.
And a lot of people don't think of that. They just think, oh, coma, okay, you were out and you wake up and you go back to your life. But I had to learn how to do everything again. So I would get up, I would need help learning how to shower again. And then I would start my first therapy sessions of the day, physical, occupational, and speech therapy, after which we broke for lunch. And it was at one of these lunches in my hospital room with my mom, who was my advocate at the time, which is one of the things I talk about within support, is you have to make sure that you have an advocate. Doesn't have to be family, but you have to have someone as your advocate looking out for you when you're there. I can remember in my hospital room on that day, having lunch with my mom in a wheelchair and looking over my situation, and I just couldn't figure it out. I can remember turning to her and saying, am I ever going to be able to walk again? And she said, of course you are. That's what we're doing here, so you can get everything back and we can go home. Steps. So this allowed me to keep moving forward. Now, were there maybe other micro moments of doubt throughout that time? Maybe. However, because I was always surrounded with positivity, and I had my ideal in mind of, okay, I'm going to be back 100% like I was before my accident. That's the only piece of doubt that I can remember. And I just had that low moment of like, is this really, am I going to be able to walk again? So I always think that's important to share.
Thank you. It's amazing. And I think it's so important for people to hear the self-doubt that does come in when people are in these adverse journeys, because we are going to question, am I ever going to feel better? Even when I have clients here in my office and they're going through a rough experience, I always hear, when am I going to stop feeling this pain or this fear or this sadness or this self-doubt? And that's a questioning. And it comes from, am I stuck here? Should I have hope? Because there's a part of it that's like, if I keep holding on to hope, I could get hurt. I could maybe not realize my goal for whatever reason. But I think your story is proof that all goals can be achievable and attainable with the right support and the right steps in place.
Absolutely. And I wanted to share kind of after that happened. So if you fast forward a little bit, I graduated high school, and then I got my real estate license, started working as a realtor, and then I let my real estate license go in 2016 and joined the family business, which is like as an investor, not as a realtor,
Understood.
as an investor. So throughout that time, and really it's been ever since I graduated from high school, I've always had this voice in the back of my head, no matter how much success I'm seeing at a certain craft, or like as a realtor, I did door knocking one time when I was in high school. Like no matter what sort of success I'm seeing, that voice in the back of my head is saying, yeah, okay, great, Nick, but what you really need to be doing is helping trauma survivors get through their trauma and thrive with the rest of their lives. So that's always been there. And I haven't been able, no matter what I've done, I haven't been able to get rid of that. So part of my work with our family real estate business, we've been holding events, yearly events, once or twice a year since 2016. So I've usually got I've usually had the opportunity to share my story from stage. So I've been able to scratch that itch. However, that voice hasn't gone away, and I've always just naturally done it. Then it became so much that in 2019, September 2019, someone saw me speak at one of our events prior to COVID, and they approached me after and they said, I'm not trying to steal you from your dad. However, if you're ever looking to fine tune your message and bring it to another level so you're able to impact and affect the most amount of people possible, I can open some doors for you and introduce you to some coaches and mentors. Well, I wasn't ready yet because I was still going through a voice issue that I had developed in 2012. And obviously, I don't have it anymore. It's worked its way out of my system. But my voice was still very tight. I got my voice back 100% after the accident. This was from me screaming my scripts and yelling and trying to get myself psyched up before I got on the phone. So another, maybe you can have me back and I'll talk about that a little bit. But so I wasn't ready yet. However, I hung on to her card. I hung on to it until May of 2021, and I finally reached out to her. The voice just was too loud. It just kept getting louder, and I said, "Okay, I'm ready. What should I do?" And she introduced me to her mentor, who's become my mentor, Trisha Brooke, who I had a phone call with. From that one phone call, ever since then, there has been no voice in the back of my head. And what that's evidence to me of is that I'm on exactly the right path and I'm doing exactly what I was meant to do, what I was put on this earth to do. So she was one that actually pulled the step system out of me. And she said, "Okay, great. You have a great story. You got in an accident, you were in a coma, and then you ran out of the hospital 60 days later. How'd you do it?" I said, "I don't know. I just got up every day and I kept taking my next step." And she goes, "No, not good enough." So she kept asking me like 6 or 7 layers deep to a point where, Stacy, I was frustrated. I was like, I don't know. I wanted to be done. I wanted to be off the call, whatever we were talking about at the time. And I'm so thankful for the work that I've done with her, because as a result from that came the step system.
Yeah.
Trisha was the one that helped me launch my company, Common Goal, which we work with trauma survivors to thrive with the rest of their lives. And now, prior to Trisha, the longest that I had ever spoke before was maybe 15, 20 minutes. Now I'm giving keynote speeches and webinars to, like 2 days ago, the Brain Injury Association of America, usually at Brain Injury Association's annual conference, 50 and 60-minute keynotes, which to me that wouldn't have even been possible.
I love it.
And they're paying me to tell my story and to help other trauma survivors thrive with the rest of their lives. So I wanted to hit that.
Yeah, no, I get it. Because look, I have this saying that I've been saying for years, which is there's purpose in pain and there's a gift in every challenge. And obviously we wouldn't wish this type of experience on anyone. But when you can go through this level of adversity and you can see the purpose in it and how you could not offer what you offer to people, which is inspiration and hope, perhaps without having gone through something so tragic and traumatic, it's kind of profound.
I don't think I would have been handed this without I don't think God would have put me through this
Right.
if I couldn't help people from it.
I'd love to talk about Common Goal. You founded, as you mentioned, Common Goal, and its mission is to help others overcome obstacles and achieve their dreams. Can you tell me more about what inspired you to create the organization itself and how you feel it's making an impact?
Yeah, absolutely. So all throughout, and I've touched on it a little bit in my story, that all throughout my life, I've I've done, not only have I had this voice in the back of my head, whenever someone in my orbit, like anyone that knows me and has someone, a friend, a family member, a relative, whatever, get in an accident, they're like, oh, have you talked to Nick? You got to talk to Nick if they know me. And I've always just unconsciously shared this step system with them.
Right.
And help them through whatever they're going through. I just one day at a time. All right, what's your next step? What do we have to do here? Like, I've unknowingly shared this step system with people ever since my accident. And I think that has scratched the itch and let that voice get quieter for a little bit. But then it got to a point, like I said, in May of 2021, I reached out to Trisha. I've done that my entire life.
Yeah.
And now I get to tell my story from stage, which is impact and effect. And as you said, give others, individuals going through trauma, hope and encouragement and kind of the tools that they need to get through it. So where it came from, I've done it my whole life, but now, thanks to my work with Trisha, she was the one that helped pull the step system out of me and launch Common Goal.
So we know about the lessons that you've learned, right? Because they're kind of baked into this step system. And it's clear to me that resilience is such a large part of it. So how can people build resilience and push through tough times separate from yours, different from yours? But, how can they build resilience and push through tough times when they feel stuck or the time feels insurmountable?
If you look at the big picture, I know that everyone's taught to like have a goal and like have where you want to be, but literally when you suffer a traumatic injury, a traumatic event, or even not even a traumatic event, you've had some kind of accident or really anything, you have something insurmountable in front of you. It's not going to be productive for you to think, yeah, okay, I want to get 27 steps down the line, and that's going to help me if I think about that. What you have to do is just take some steps, some action, focus on something you can do, you can control today, that's right in front of you. And then once you take that step, that's the magic. That step is your next step is always going to be available to you as long as you take that first step. It doesn't matter how small it is, but that will start you on your path. And I think there are so many people today that are stuck just because they built it up in their head that, oh my God, I got to do this, or I have to get to my ideal 27 steps down the line. Just focus on what is the next logical best step that you can take in front of you today. And then once you take that step, your next step is going to be available. That's what I've seen. Both personally and with clients that we've worked with.
So I took a look at your website before we met and did a little of my homework and research. And I watched a couple of your talks. And you did a talk about stillness in a coma, right? And which I found to be incredibly inspiring. And anybody that's listening, I highly recommend you go to Nick's website, which is nickprefontaine.com. and go to where his speaker section is and look at the very first video. It was really a thoughtful talk. And one of the things you talked about in that video was that you have a mentor who's taught you how to meditate. So
Yep.
How does meditation fit into this system or fit into the way that you navigate life in general?
As you've seen, if you've seen that talk that you're talking about, my introduction to stillness was a coma, this is one of my favorite things to talk about, and that's the E of the step system.
Okay.
So stillness and meditation fits within the E of the step system. So I haven't had the opportunity to touch on it today, but energy includes, I only talked about after the traumatic event and getting off the medication as soon as you can. Well, after I got out of the hospital, after running out of the hospital and finishing rehab, I started to see 3 years after I finished my rehab, I started seeing a naturopathic doctor who did everything based on your blood type. And I would have supplements that I have to take with every meal. I had a very strict diet, like a booklet based on my blood type. And then I had to get all these treatments, like just to name a few: foot bath, colonic, acupuncture, hyperbaric chamber, fangotherapy, infrared sauna. I would get a lot of those every 2 to 3 weeks to help rid my body of all the toxins. So I think that's very important, that you're taking care of your health and your energy, because it's actually interesting. After that, after seeing him for 3 years, I remember I would have reviews with them every 6 to 12 months. And I can remember sitting there and one of the doctors at the Institute saying to me, looking at all my charts and the progress that I made since I started seeing them. And he said, look, Nick, you've done such a great job sticking with the program and following the diet, taking the supplements, and most importantly, getting all these treatments every 2 to 3 weeks. There's really not much we have left that we can do for you. You can come here for maintenance. And it was right around that time I got introduced to my next teacher, who I just saw not him, but his top student, because he's in China right now. I just saw him yesterday, and I got Tui Na followed by cupping. And I get that once every 5 weeks to help keep my energy strong. I forgot the question.
It's okay.
I'm sorry.
We were talking about meditation, but now I have all kinds of other questions, because I do acupuncture every few weeks, and I get cupping every few weeks at the end of that acupuncture session. And this kind of is a segue into what I was going to ask you. The reason why I do that is because the organization that I'm certified through as a trauma care practitioner really encourages us to create and stick with a plan to support ourselves, because we are holding space for so much, right? So as a preventative measure to not burn out, I'm constantly either getting acupuncture and cupping at the same time, or I'm doing, lymphatic drainage massage, all these different things in order to release a lot of the energy to your E that I take in as a practitioner. So as you were talking, one of the questions I had, and by the way, I think it's so interesting because a lot of these things that you're talking about, the foot baths, the acupuncture, the cupping, the red light therapy, flotation tanks, like all of these things are becoming very popular now, right? I've been doing them for many, many years, but I'm seeing the groundswell, especially of the red light therapy. But when you talk about the detox of the toxins and being on that booklet of diet, were they trying to detox you from metals and from the physical things that you had to take into your body during that time? Or was it the emotional toll? I mean, we can't not think about even though your mindset was good, there was a trauma to your body at some point, even if it was something you don't remember as you were rolling down that hill of a lack of safety, a lack of security, a powerlessness, a helplessness, an unknown outcome, which can be very toxic, if you will, to the system in a really extreme way. It was a near-death experience, right? So even if you're not remembering that part of it, the body keeps the score. Your body knows you went through this event. So how much of the detoxing had to do with the medical or the metal and physicality of the medication and all of that versus the emotional toxins in the body from that experience? Do you know?
Terrific question. So I would say that it was the mindset behind it was the metals and everything that was pumped into me to help keep me alive. And what's interesting is I'm sure it helped heal the mental, emotional part as well that you're talking about. But I don't think 100%, because after seeing that doctor intensely for 3 years and getting all the toxins out of my body, when I really started making progress with, if you'll call it the mental, emotional, and like the body, like you were saying, the body keeps a score, was when I was introduced to meditation.
Yeah.
And then meditation, I still meditate. I don't want to say every day because that's not realistic. It's not every day. It's usually several times a week. I don't know, 3 to 5 times a week. I think with the introduction to that and the work that I've done recently, I've been working with I call her my energy coach. She doesn't call herself and profess herself as an energy coach.
Okay.
But I've been working with her for the past 5 years. And the amount of growth that I've seen and the amount of stuff that's come up as a result of working with her and just exploring, getting quiet. Like a lot of the work we do is meditation, but a lot of it is getting quiet and seeing what surfaces.
Yeah.
And then talking about it, and then it's out of my system. So the amount of growth I've seen just from her and my work with her is astounding. So I can't say I've had like clinical therapy. However, talking about these things that are pent up and inside of me because of my accident, I think has been instrumental in my growth.
There's no doubt. And listen, anybody that's been listening to podcasts knows that I believe in all types of processing, right? When it comes to mental health, but I'm also not a subscriber to like the institutionalization of the mental health complex and pathologizing everything, right? So whether you're working with a clinical therapist or an energy healer or a trauma recovery coach or whoever it is, the process of processing what comes up, like you said, you get quiet to see what comes up. The way I do it, and we didn't talk about this off camera before we got started, but as a trauma recovery coach, one of the things that I'm further trained in is hypnosis. And I utilize a very specific type of hypnosis known as rapid transformational therapy to do exactly what you just said. Allow that conscious mind to get sleepy and disengage and give total ownership to the subconscious mind. And then a little bit different from the meditation where we're just getting quiet and still and seeing what comes up. I actually kind of direct for something to come up, but I'm directing it based on what I know the goal is of my client based on subsequent, sessions prior. But this idea of getting to the subconscious is so important because that's where our feelings lie. So I love the fact that you found a tool in meditation as a way to do what I call widening the window of tolerance, right? And widening our capacity for resilience in order to navigate the emotions that come up through life's stressors, whether it's just a daily life stressor or still trying to process a traumatic event.
Stacey, it's so well said. But the more and more I get out there, and the more and more of this work that I do, I'm seeing that I don't have any training in trauma recovery like you do, or like any like doctorates or certifications or anything. I lived it
That's
though.
right.
So what people like doctors or trauma experts, like trauma recovery experts, what they all say, I'm like either I'm nodding my head, like, oh yeah, that's 100% right, or they're saying the same thing to me, like, oh yeah, we're aligned, we're like on the same channel,
Yeah.
and that's really been amazing to me.
Yeah. So, my last question for you is listeners who may be facing their own personal struggles. What's one piece of advice you could offer them to stay focused on overcoming that adversity and pursuing that goal?
So I think I already touched on it a little bit, but I'd love to reiterate it. The Even if you feel stuck or overwhelmed by what's in front of you, my inkling is that my idea is that you have some inkling of what you should be doing. Like, you have some direction that or you at least think you should try. Just don't freeze. Take that first step. Because once you do, then your next step's always going to be available. But freezing is so common in our society nowadays that the most important thing is action. And I've done that throughout my entire life, is just know enough to mess it up and then take action and then correct it.
You know, it's making me think. I do this one guided hypnosis for people who lack confidence. And typically when they lack confidence, they have a very, very loud inner critic. Right? So I call it the itty bitty shitty committee. Some people call it the inner chatter, but there are some people that walk with a very loud inner critic. And part of what I've felt for you in this interview is you had less of an inner critic and more of this massive inner cheerleading squad in your mind, cheering you on, in addition to people outside of you. And when I do this hypnosis recording for my clients, it's called Install the Inner Cheerleader, Quiet the Inner Critic, right? And, you know, sometimes even just taking that first step, the moment they know they want to do it and just take that little momentum, that little tiny first step, they might end up with that inner critic that says, you know, if you try that, you could fail, or, you know, if you tried that, you could fall. And I think the antithesis of that is, I know I'm not going to get this right on the first go, or I know I may not succeed to the ultimate outcome. We're not looking at the ultimate outcome right now. We're looking at the process. And the process is just engaging in the first step, regardless of what the outcome is going to be, because it's a step towards something in the future. Would you agree with that?
I would. And I just want to do one point of emphasis here. There are two different voices. So it's not the same voice. Like I've talked about the voice in the back of my head. That's love, positivity. That's the universe. That's God. To me, that's a different voice than the inner critic.
Oh yeah.
They're two completely different, and at least in my head, they're two completely different tones. Tonality, just they're different, and it's very easy to spot the difference. But the best way to get, and the best way, I don't even feel like I have an inner critic. Maybe I don't know, but what I would say is the best way to get rid of that, probably because of this, the best way to get rid of your inner critic is to take action.
Yeah. Well, and I would say, because I do a lot of work in the realm of what's known as parts work, and an inner critic would be known as a part. And what I would say is that, to exactly what you said, every part of us, you said, sounds different, has a different tone to it, right? And what I tell my client is every single part of you has a different ringtone. And if you start to become attuned to the nuances of the different frequency, the different energy, the different feeling, the different vibration, the different sensation you get in your body when that part is present, you can start to become much more familiar with all of your parts. That part that you called God, the universe, whatever, that's the part of us that's connected to self. That's your core. That's your essence. That's your life source, right? That's what you were born with. All of these other parts are like fractured and fragmented pieces of that whole piece of us, right? And what I would say to people that are listening is, if they are people who have an inner critic, because I'm kind of like you, I did not have an innate inner critic growing up. And I honestly didn't even know it existed until my 30s, when I would hear other people talk about their inner critic, to the point where I heard it so many times. I was like, this must be a thing for people, which other people find very strange that I've had a lot of voices, but I've never had an inner critic. I had more of an internal fighter, right? What I've learned as a practitioner of parts work is we never want to ask that inner critic to cut it to the curb. What we want to do is question it and dialogue with it. And if it's saying something that's trying to stop us in our tracks, we get to dialogue with it and say, well, is that true? And then try to tap into that source of self to hear the truth. And even if that inner critic's like, yeah, that's true, we get to ask it, well, what else do I know to be true? What else I know to be true is I could try to take this step and just getting out of bed, just maybe that one effort, just getting my feet over the side of the bed, maybe just planting my feet on the ground, maybe just standing up with some support from someone is more than I did the day before. Right? So we can always dialogue with that inner critic as a way to find out how it thinks it's actually trying to help us, even though it actually is a hinder, and see if it can help us in a different way towards our collective goal. For your case, running out. This has been such a great interview. As we wrap up, I would love for people to learn more about how they can find access to the STEPS program that you have talked about so much. How can somebody find out more about who you are, what you do in your STEPS program?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for the time. This has been a blast. They can head over to my website, which is nickprefontaine.com/step. And they can download the entire STEP system for free. That's going to teach them, I mean, what we covered is only a 10,000 foot view, believe it or not, of the STEP system. So what that's going to do once they download it is teach them all about support, trust, energy, and persistence, and especially those people out there who are feeling stuck. Download it, because it's going to be a great first step and help you take your first step today.
Thank you, Nick, so much for sharing your incredible story and the wisdom that you gained through this experience. Your insights really offered valuable lessons in resilience, mindset, and achieving success despite obstacles through your STEPS system. To learn more about Nick's work, his STEP system, and his mission with Common Goal, visit his website. It's nickprefontaine.com. And if you found this particular episode inspiring, please subscribe. Subscribing is so important. Leave a review, share it with anyone who you might feel could benefit from Nick's story. Until next time, please stay resilient and remember that every setback is a setup for a comeback.